We are holding in middle of Seif Gimel in the Maimer Margala Bepumei Tafshin Mem. In the last Shiurim, we learned the Memra, the statement of Rava, in which Rava says, Tachlis Chachma is Tshuvan Maisim Tevim. The word Tachlis has many explanations, but the Frierdiker Rebbe brought the Pirush of Rashi. The Rashi explains what is Rava saying in his statement. Rava is saying, Iker Shal Torah, the essence of Torah is that it should be accompanied with Tshuvan Maisim Tevim. That's how Rashi explains this statement of Rava. That again, the Iker of Torah, Tachlis means the Iker, the essence of Torah is that it should be accompanied with Tshuvan Maisim Tevim. So the Frierdiker Rebbe asks, in his Maimer, a very simple question. How can we say that the Iker of Torah, the essence of Torah, is Tshuvan Maisim Tevim? The essence of Torah is Havana Vasaga. If we were to say that the word Tachlis means the purpose or the goal of Torah is Tshuvan Maisim Tevim, so there wouldn't be a question. That would make sense. If you were to translate the word Tachlis as the goal, the ultimate purpose, so that would be okay. In other words, Rava would be saying that the purpose of learning Torah, why do we learn Torah? What's our intent? When we learn Torah is to bring us to Tshuvan Maisim Tevim. However, now that Rashi explains that Rava is not saying the purpose of Torah is Tshuvan Maisim Tevim, but Rava is saying that the Iker of Torah itself, the very essence of Torah, is Tshuvan Maisim Tevim. So we must understand, what does that mean? The Rebbe goes further in Seif Beis to strengthen the question of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that we know that learning Torah is an Aveda that highlights and emphasizes that the person who's learning Torah should use out his mitzias. That's why Torah is all about Havana Vasaga. The idea of Torah is that a person has to use his intellect, use his mitzias, his understanding, to understand the seichel of the Eibishter. So Torah is an Aveda that again brings out and highlights the mitzias of the person that's learning the Torah. As opposed to Tshuvan Maisim Tevim. Tshuvan Maisim Tevim is all about bittul, about putting yourself on the side and doing what the Eibishter wants, putting your mitzias on the side and being makabel il, accepting the yoke of heaven, being makabel il malch shamayim. That's what Tshuvan Maisim Tevim is all about. So how can we say that the Iker of Torah, the essence of Torah, of mitzias, is Tshuvan Maisim Tevim bittul? That makes no sense. What does this mean? What is Rava saying in his memory, in his statement? That is the question of the Frierdiker Rebbe with the way the Rebbe strengthens the question in Seif Beis. So in Seif Gimel, we started learning the beer of the Frierdiker Rebbe. In order to explain this question, the Frierdiker Rebbe brings a Maimer Zayar. It says in the Zayar, Leis machshava tvisa bach klal, avol nitvas iyo berus de liba. No machshava, no intellect has the ability to grasp the essence of the Eibishter. However, the essence of the Eibishter could be grasped through Ru'us de Liba, through the desire of the heart. That's what we learned. We just started learning the beer of the Frierdiker Rebbe in Seif Gimel. We did not learn what exactly Ru'us de Liba is. What is Ru'us de Liba? And why is it? What is this Maila of Ru'us de Liba? Why is it that Ru'us de Liba has the ability to grasp and to connect the Yid with the essence of the Eibishter as opposed to Seichel, as opposed to Machshava? That we did not yet learn, and we're going to learn it today. Let's first read a few lines of Seif Gimel inside, and then we'll do some explaining. We're holding in the fourth line of Seif Gimel, the first paragraph of Seif Gimel, Va'ininu. Says the Rebbe, Va'ininu de ba'ava beis madreges b'chlalos. In general, when we're talking about ava, about having a person having a love to the Eibishter, there are two general categories in avas Hashem. Ava shal pitam vadas, va'ava atzmis shemesat etzam neshama shemkusheres ima atzmis. One level of ava is an ava that's based off tam vadas, off reasoning, off logic. And then there's an ava, we call it ava atzmis, an inherent ava, an ava that every yid has, mitzad etzam and neshama. The very essence of a yid, the very essence of his neshama, has an inherent love to the essence of the Eibishter. These are the two general types of ava. An ava that's based off logic, reasoning, ava shall be tam vadas, an ava shall l'maylam tam vadas, an ava atzmis, an ava, natural and inherent ava that every yid has to the essence of the Eibishter. What's an example for this second level of Ava, says the Rebbe? Al derech avas ben la'aviv. She Ava atzmis, she me'etzma ben la'etzma av. This second level of Ava could be compared to the Ava that a child has to his father, which the Ava that a child has to his father is again an inherent love that comes from the very essence, stems forth from the very essence of the child, and is directed towards the very essence of his father. But Ava zu Nekras b'shem rus deliba. So this second ava, this ava atzmis, this ava which is not based off reasoning, but it's an inherent and natural ava that every neshama has to the essence of the Eibishter, this second level of ava is what we call ru'usa deliba, the desire of the heart. V'zeu nitvas ir brus deliba. And this is what the Zohar means when it says that he himself, that the essence of the Eibishter himself is grasped through ru'usa deliba. The k'meisha ben me'ir es atmos ha'av. The ksha ben tsoyik abba. Nizuz ha'av b'chol mahusay. K'meikin hu ba'nimshol sha'av ha'atzmis shemsat etzim neshama tefeses ba'atzmis. Says the Rebbe, just like we see that when a child calls out to his father, when a child screams out to his father, the child awakens and the child touches the very essence of his father. So too, when we're discussing the ava between Yid and the Eibishter, when a Yid calls out, when a Yid, so to speak, calls out to the Eibishter, using his ava atzmis through Ru'us Deliba, when a Yid reveals his natural inherent love, his Ru'us Deliba, that he has to the Eibishter, specifically that ava touches and is teifus, can grasp the essence of the Eibishter. And this is the Rebbe's short explanation as to what Ru'us Deliba is, and what does it mean that Ru'us Deliba grasps the essence of the Eibishter as opposed to Machshava. Let's take just a few minutes to explain this idea. We know, it's explained in Chassidus, and we already have it in Tanya, at the end of Tanya, that in Ava, when it comes to loving the Eibishter, there are many, many different levels of Ava, many types of Ava. However, Ba'if Klali, in general, we can split all of these Avas into two categories. Like the Alter Rebbe splits them in the introduction to Shayich V'Amunah. There are two types of Ava. One Ava is an Ava which is based off Seichel, based off his Sbeidinus, that a person creates. He creates his Ava, his love that he has to the Eibishter, through contemplating on the greatness of the Eibishter. And then there is an Ava which is a natural Ava that every neshama has. Every neshama naturally loves the Eibishter. And this is called an Ava Shalamayim B'tam V'das. Or the Ava, the way that describes it here, an Ava Atzmis. To understand, to have a better understanding of these two Avas, let's use a mashal from a humanistic type of Ava, and that'll help us understand these two levels of Ava, the way they apply to Avodas Hashem. We find in our world two relationships that are based off, or that are very connected with Ava, with love. You have a relationship between two friends, let's say Reuven and Shimon. There are two friends, Reuven and Shimon, and they are good friends, so their relationship is based off and strongly connected with love. And then there is a relationship between a child and his father. And that's also a relationship that is based off, again, and connected, strongly connected with Ava, with love. What is the difference between these two relationships? So, first of all, the most basic difference is that when you have two friends that love each other, the reason why Reuven loves Shimon, his Ava is usually based off Seichel. Meaning to say, Reuven sees certain qualities in Shimon, certain milas, certain good virtues, good qualities in Shimon. And Reuven's Seichel tells Reuven that being that Shimon possesses these qualities, it's worthwhile, it's kedai to have a close relationship with him. It makes sense to love Shimon. It makes sense to be close to Shimon. Being that you see all these values, all these valuable things, all these good virtues, etc., in Shimon. So it's worthwhile having a good relationship and a good connection and loving Shimon. So again, Reuven's connection, Reuven's relationship to Shimon is based off seeing certain milas, apiseichel, in Shimon. However, the Ava, the love between a father and a child, is not based off the fact that the father sees certain milas in the child. A father's love to a child is unconditional, and a love that the child has to his father is also unconditional. Of course, a father wants to see milas in his child, but that's not what his love and that's not what his relationship is based off. Whether the father can see certain good qualities in the child or not, the father will always love the child. Why? Because the love that a father has to a child, and al derech zeh, the love that a child has to the father, is inherent. It's natural and absolute. It's unconditional. The love of the child to the father is not based off the milas and the good qualities that he sees al pi seichel in his father, and al derech zeh, vice versa. So that's, first of all, a difference in the cause of the Ava. What causes a friend, what causes Reuven to love Shimon is very different than what causes the father to love the child. Reuven's love to Shimon is based off Seichel. Seichel is the cause for the Ava that Reuven has to Shimon. The Milas that Seichel sees, the Milas that Seichel is able to pick up in Shimon is what causes Reuven to love Shimon. As opposed to a father and a son, the child loves the father just because he's his father. Not because he sees any Milas or any Seichel dika virtues in his father. He loves him. The cause of the love is the very fact that he's his child. Again, so this is all a difference in the cause. However, the difference in the cause of the Ava actually tells us that there's a difference in the nature of the Ava itself. The nature of the love itself is totally different. The relationship is totally different. The difference between the two types of love is not only what causes the love, but the entire nature of the love itself is different. What does this mean? Being that Reuven loves Shimon al pi seichel, what that tells us is that Reuven's connection and relationship to Shimon is only to the part of Shimon that relates to Reuven. The qualities of Shimon that speak to Reuven, those are the qualities to which Reuven has a love to. In other words, Reuven taka has a love to Shimon, but his love is not to the very essence of Shimon. The love of Reuven is not directed to the very essence of Shimon. The very essence of Shimon, which is beyond Shimon's qualities, the essence of Shimon, which is beyond having a relationship, beyond the part of Shimon that does not relate to Reuven, is, so to speak, out of Reuven's reach. Reuven's seichel only tells him to love Shimon, the part of Shimon that relates to Reuven. The qualities that Reuven's seichel can pick up in Shimon, those qualities are the cause of the love, and therefore that tells us that that's the part of Shimon that Reuven loves. Reuven's Ava is not directed to the essence of Shimon. Reuven doesn't love Shimon in his most natural form. He doesn't love Shimon for who he is in his essence. He loves Shimon for the qualities that his seichel can pick up in Shimon, as opposed to a father and a son. The son, being that the son, loves the father, not because the qualities that he sees in the father, but he loves the father just because he is his father. That tells us that the love of the child is directed to the very essence of the father. Who does he love? The father himself. He doesn't love a certain detail, a certain prat, a certain quality, a certain maila that he sees in the father. But when you ask the child, who do you love? He loves the father. What does he mean by the father? He doesn't mean a certain maila, a certain quality that his seichel picks up. When the child says he loves the father, it means he loves the very essence of the father for who he is himself. And again, vice versa, the father loves the child for who he is. He loves the very essence of the child. So that's the difference between, again, not only the cause of the Ava, but the entire nature of the Ava is different. Being that two friends, like Reuven and Shimon, the Ava between Reuven and Shimon is based off Seichel. So the relationship is such that it's not actually a connection, it's not a fusion between the essence of Reuven and the essence of Shimon. They love each other pi seichel. So the milas of Shimon talk to Reuven, and the milas of Reuven talk to Shimon. They're connected, so to speak, on an external level. They're not connected to each other's essence. As opposed to a father and a child, being that their love is natural and inherent, so the love of the child is directed towards the very essence of the father, and the love of the father is directed towards the very essence of the child. And that's why we find that when a child calls out to his father in love, so the father is very affected. Like the Lashon of the Maimer, when a child calls out to his father, the entire essence of the father becomes moved. As opposed to when you have two friends that love each other and they're very close. But at the end of the day, being that the love of Reuven is only directed towards the milas of Shimon, the milas that he can comprehend based off his seichel, so therefore the love of Reuven, again, they're friends, they're very close friends, and they're real friends. But the love of Reuven does not touch Shimon in his very essence. Why? Because milchatchila, the love of Reuven, is not connected and not directed to the very essence of Shimon. So therefore, even when Reuven shows his love to Shimon and shows that he wants to be close with him and he wants to be a good friend with him, at the end of the day, the love of Reuven is not going to touch the very essence of Shimon. As opposed to a father and a son, when the child calls out to his father in love, so then that tzaika, that call of the child moves the father in his very essence. Because milchatchila, the love of the child, is directed to the very essence of the father. That is all in the mashal, so too in the nimshal. Sometimes a yid can love the imshal pi tam v'das, through his baininus, al pi seichel, using his intellect. But what that means to say is that a child that when the Yid loves the Eibishter based off Seichel, based off his Beinus, he's only loving, so to speak, the external levels of the Eibishter. The Yid is only loving the Eibishter the way he can comprehend the Eibishter, the milas, the greatness of the Eibishter that he's able to comprehend based off Seichel. But the Yid's Ava is not connected to the essence of the Eibishter. He's not loving the very essence of Hashem. As opposed to when a Yid feels that he's the Eibishter's child. When a Yid feels that the Eibishter is his father. So when a Yid is able to reveal that level of Ava, that he feels that he's the Eibishter's child, the Eibishter is his father, and he loves the Eibishter by revealing this part of himself, what we call Re'us Deliba, revealing this Ava Atzmis, this inherent and natural Ava that every Yid possesses to the Eibishter, being that the Yid feels that the Eibishter is his father. So that Ava is directed towards the very essence of the Eibishter. And that's why when Yid reveals his Ava Atzmis, his Re'us Deliba, Nitfas Iu Be'Re'us Deliba, the very essence of the Eibishter, Iu, the very essence of Hashem, is grasped, so to speak, and is touched by this Ava. Because specifically this Ava, the Ava Atzmis, is the Ava that reveals the Yid's connection to the very essence of the Eibishter. That is, briefly, the Nukuda that the Rebbe is explaining here in this paragraph, based off the Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So now says that we're going to read weiter in Seif Gimel. Now says the Frierdiker Rebbe, this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying after the Frierdiker Rebbe introduces. And the Frierdiker Rebbe in his Maimer discusses at length the concept of Re'us Deliba. So says the Frierdiker Rebbe, V'zeu shetachlis v'ikar chachma, hu tshuva ma'asim tevim. This will explain to us the statement of Rava, that Rava said that the essence of Torah, of chachma, is tshuva ma'asim tevim, ki chachma tifeses rak b'giluyim kanal, u'b'chdei litris ba'atzmos, u'dei tshuva ma'asim tevim. So says the Frierdiker Rebbe, based off this Zohar, we can understand that chachma, intellect, or al-derech said Torah and machshava and intellect, can only grasp giluyim. Chachma does not have the ability to grasp, to make a Yid in tuned with the essence of the Eibishter. However, how could you grasp the essence of the Eibishter? Through tshuva ma'asim tevim. And this is what it means, tachlis chachma tshuva ma'asim tevim. This is what the Frierdiker Rebbe says in his Maimer. So right away, when you read these lines, there are two very obvious questions. The first obvious question is, what just happened here? What was the shift? We're in the middle of talking, the Zohar says that Chachma, Machshava, cannot grasp Atzmos. Re'us Deliba, the Ava Atzmis, could grasp the essence of the Eibishter. So says the Frierdiker Rebbe, and this is what it means, Tachlis Chachma Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, that you can't grasp the Eibishter through Chachma, through Seichel. But how do you grasp him through Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim? How do we get the Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim? We were in the middle of talking about Re'us Deliba. That's a very obvious question that has to be addressed. The Rebbe right away addresses it in Ha'ara 16. But the Rebbe says the explanation for how we took the sudden turn, the Rebbe is going to elaborate and explain in Seif Dalet. So let's put that question on hold. That's an obvious question in the flow, in the Hemshech and Yanim of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer. What's he saying? He starts off talking about Re'us Deliba and ends off with Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. So that's in Seif Dalet the Rebbe is going to explain. But here in Seif Gimel, the Rebbe is going to go on to asking a much, much more basic question. And that is, how exactly is the Frierdiker Rebbe answering the question that he asked on the statement of Rava? Let's remind ourselves. What was the question on the statement of Rava? Rava says that the tachlis of Chachma, and Rashi explains that that means the ikar of Chachma, the essence of Torah, is Shehei Ima Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. The essence of Torah is that should be accompanied with Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. So the question of the Frierdiker Rebbe was, of course the goal and the purpose of learning Torah could be for Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, but the essence of Torah itself is not Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Torah itself, what is Torah about? Torah is about Havana Vasaga. The ikar and the essence of Torah is Havana Vasaga. That was the question of the Frierdiker Rebbe. What's the Frierdiker Rebbe saying now? Based off the Zohar, that Torah, Chachma, cannot grasp Atzmos, but Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim could grasp Atzmos. So what are you doing? You're telling me that Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim is greater than Torah. How does that explain to me why Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim is the ikar and the essence of Chachma? That's obviously a very basic question. What is the Frierdiker Rebbe's beer here? Let's see the question inside in the second paragraph of Seif Gimel. Says the Rebbe, "V'tzarich l'havin the inyan zed the Chachma tifasses b'giluyim u'b'chtei litis ba'atzmos so they Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim mevar rak ha'mayla sheb'Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim l'gabi Chachma." What's the Frierdiker Rebbe doing by bringing this Zohar? Simply, the Frierdiker Rebbe is explaining that there's a mayla to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim over Chachma. Why? Now, the Rebbe is going to go on for a few lines here to explain why that's a chiddush. Let's see in the inside of the Maimer. Although when we're talking about the levels of the nefesh, the different levels in the person's keiches that are connected with chachma and tshuva ma'asim tevim, we will find that seemingly Torah chachma is higher than tshuva and ma'asim tevim. When we're discussing which darga, which level of a person's nefesh is involved in Torah, and which darga of a person's nefesh is involved in Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, we will find that actually there's an advantage to Chachma, to Torah, over Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. What's that advantage? Says the Rebbe, the limud HaTorah ba'aseichel shabei. Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, hey b'midas shabeleiv b'keich ha'maisa, Tshuva is in midas ha'leiv, u'Ma'asim Tevim b'keich ha'maisa. What level, what darga and nefesh adam is involved in Torah, in learning Torah? A person's seichel, a person's intellect. Intellect is the highest darga in the nefesh adam, in a person's psyche, in a person's personality. His keich seichel, his intellectual capacity, is the highest darga in the keich nefesh. So when a person learns Torah, what level in his nefesh is he using? Seichel. As opposed to tshuva and ma'asim tevim, tshuva is connected with midas. Obviously, tshuva is all about the idea of having charat al avar and kabbalah teva lahaba. That's all idea a person is using his emotions, his leiv. A person makes a achlata decision in his heart, and a person regrets in his heart. So obviously when a person does tshuva, it's more connected with his emotions. And for sure when it comes to fulfilling Torah mitzvahs, physical Torah mitzvahs are connected with your koyach ha'maisa, which is your lowest koyach. Even an animal has koyach ha'maisa, a person's ability to act, to do movements with his body, etc., to use his koyach ha'maisa. Even an animal has koyach ha'maisa. So koyach ha'maisa is the lowest level, the lowest darga b'nefesh adam. So on the one hand, Torah would seemingly, if you ask a person what's higher, Torah or Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, so a person would say, when a person is looking from the perspective of which keiches you use to fulfill Torah and which keiches you use to do Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, so a person would say Chachma is higher than Torah is higher than Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. However, that's the chiddush the Frierdiker is saying in the Maimer based off the Zohar, Mikol Makom, Ma'ila b'Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, She'el Daf Tevsim Ba'atzmas. However, this is the chiddush that the Frierdiker is introducing, that although when a person learns Torah, he uses seichel, and when a person does Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, he's using the lower levels of his nefesh. He's using his midas, his emotions, he's using his keich ha'maisa, etc. So seemingly Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim are lower than Chachma. Kamash Malan, so the Frierdiker is teaching us that actually there's a ma'ila, there's an advantage to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim over Chachma. Chachma, Torah does not have the ability to grasp atzmas. Torah does not have the ability to connect the yid, to make a yid in tune with the essence of the Eibishter. As opposed to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim have the ability to connect the yid with the essence of the Eibishter. Fine. So there's a maila, the Frierdiker is teaching us, there's a maila to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, there's an advantage and a greatness to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim over Chachma, over Torah. Good. But says the Rebbe, this idea is not going to help us understand the statement of Rava. Rava said, Tachas Chachma Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, and we had a question, what does that mean? So this beer of explaining the maila of Tshuva and Ma'asim Tevim over Chachma is not going to help us understand what it means, Tachas Chachma Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim means the way we learned it according to Pirush Rashi. Let's take a moment to explain what this line is saying. Again, the word Tachas can have many explanations. One of them means the ultimate goal, the kavanah, the intent, the end goal of why we learn Torah is for Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Rashi told us that what does Tachas over here mean? The ikar, the essence, the core of Torah is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Now, there's another way of learning Tachas. Tachas means the ultimate ilui, the ultimate advantage, the ultimate greatness that Torah could reach. The ultimate height that Torah could reach is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, through Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. What would this mean? Based on what we just learned over here, there's Chachma, there's Torah. Torah can't grasp atzmas. Tshuva and Ma'asim Tevim could grasp atzmas. So it comes out there's an advantage to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, to doing Tshuva and mitzvahs over learning Torah. Specifically to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, we can connect to the essence of the Eibishter. As opposed to when I learned Torah, Torah on its own, without Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, cannot grasp atzmas. So, based on this vart of the Zohar, a person might learn, what does it mean that the tachlis of Chachma is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim? The ultimate ili of Torah is when it brings you to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Why? When you learn Torah by itself, when you're just learning Torah, you don't connect to Atmos at all. However, what could be the ultimate maila, so to speak? What could be the ultimate ilui that Torah could reach? If Torah brings me, if Torah brings a Yid to doing Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, so it ends up being that Torah brings a Yid to connect himself with Atzmos. Although again, through learning Torah on its own, you don't connect with Atzmos. But being that Torah brings you to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, and Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim do connect you to Atzmos, so a person can learn what's the tachlis of Chachma. In other words, what's the ultimate ilui that there could be in Torah? When Torah brings you to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, that means that Torah in a certain way connects a Yid to Atzmos indirectly. Being that Torah brings a Yid to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, and Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim connect to Atzmos, so that's the ultimate ilui that there could be in Torah. That Torah brings you to doing Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. But again, that's all if you learn that Tachlis means the ultimate ilui, the ultimate goal, and the ultimate height that Torah can reach is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. But that's not how we're learning what Tachlis means. In the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer, he's not learning Tachlis means the ultimate goal or the ultimate ilui that Torah could bring a Yid to, or that Torah itself could reach. In the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer, he's learning that Tachlis means the Iker and the essence of Torah itself is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. So that's what I was going to ask. How does this bring in this Zayar, and how does explaining that Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim reach Atzmos help us understand why the essence of Torah is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim? Again, if we were to learn that Tachlis means the ultimate Ilui, the ultimate goal, the ultimate heights that Torah could reach, so then it would be understood what the Frierdiker Rebbe is saying. But seemingly, the way the Frierdiker Rebbe learned Pshat and Tachlis, that Tachlis means the Iker and the essence of Torah, doesn't match up with this explanation he's bringing from Zayar. Let's see inside again. Says the Rebbe, read that line again. Aval bi or zeh, u'lechei rak la pirush etachas chachma utachas ha'ili de chachma. The cave on shalidei hatshuva ma'asim tevim tevsim ba'atzmos lechein alidei shachachma mevil l'tshuva ma'asim tevim nasa ili gam b'chachma al derav gadol talmud shemev de ma'isa alidei shalimud mev de ma'isa hu gadol yesem k'mei shum tzad atzmi. Says the Rebbe, if you were to tell me that tachas means the ultimate ili, the ultimate advantage, the ultimate height that Torah could reach is through Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, that would be understood. I'll definitely find Lashon in the Gemara, Gadol Talmud Shemiv de Ma'isa, which means that why is Talmud Gadol? What is the greatness of Talmud? That it brings you to Ma'isa. So what does that show you? The greatness, the ultimate ilui of Torah is that what? That it brings you to Ma'isa. Why is that? Because Ma'isa is what connects you to Atzmos. And Talmud on its own right does not connect you to Atzmos. So specifically when a Yid learns Torah, and the Torah brings him to doing Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, so that brings a gadlus and an ili to Torah. Torah on its own right, Torah by itself, does not connect you to Atzmos. Specifically when Torah brings you to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim, and Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim is what connects you to Atzmos. So that brings Torah to its ultimate ili, to its ultimate greatness. The ultimate greatness of Torah is what? That it could bring you to Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Says Rebbe, but mehem shechinam shemaim mashma the inyan zeh shachacham teis begilui ubchtei litis ba'atzmos who did Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim who gam bir al zeh sheikr shal Torah Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Says the Rebbe, from the feeling of his maimer, it's mashma that this concept that Torah cannot grasp atzmos, but Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim could grasp atzmos, is a beer will help us understand what it means that the ikar of Torah is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. The way Rashi learns Tachlis. Rashi says, what does Tachlis mean? That the Iker and the essence of Torah is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. And from the feeling of his Maimer, it sounds like that this concept, this idea that he introduced, that Torah L'Chachma cannot grasp Atzmos, and Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim could grasp Atzmos, this will help us understand what does it mean that the essence of Torah itself is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. And that needs explanation, because where do we see this idea in the feeling of his Maimer? And that's what is going to come on in the next Seifim, until Seif Zayin, to explain. Eventually, Seif Zayin, the Rebbe is going to come on to explain this idea. What does it mean that the essence of Torah itself is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim? But in order to get to that beer in Seif Zayin, the Rebbe is going to go on a long introduction, a long akdama, to give us a much deeper understanding to explain this statement in the Zohar of Leis Machshava Tusabach Klal. Avalitas Yir Brus Liba. In Seif Dalid, Seif Seif Vav, the Rebbe is going to explain at depth and at length this statement of the Zohar that Machshava, Seichel, cannot grasp Atzmos, but nitvas iyo brus liba, what exactly it means, and that's going to give a deeper explanation, and it's all in an introduction in order to explain how this Maimer Zohar helps understand what does it mean that the ikar of Torah, the essence of Torah, is Tshuva Ma'asim Tevim. Now, we just mentioned that besides for this question that the Rebbe asks in Seif Gimel, this question the Rebbe just asked, what is the Frierdiker Rebbe's beer? How did the Frierdiker Rebbe answer the question that we asked on the statement of Rava in Seif Aleph and Seif Beis. Besides for this question, there's another very basic and simple question, obvious question, on the Maimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And that is, how did the Frierdiker Rebbe get from Ru'usa de Liba to Tshuva and Maisim Tevim? The Frierdiker Rebbe brought a Maimer HaZoyar, that the Zoyar says, Nitvas iu Ru'usa de Liba, that we grasp Atzmos through Ru'usa de Liba. And then he went on to say, this is the explanation of Tachlis Chachma Tshuva Maisim Tevim, that through Tshuva and Maisim Tevim, we grasp Atzmos. How did he get from one thing to the next? That's a very basic question on the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer. What's going on in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer? And this is the question the Rebbe is coming to address here in Seif Dalet. So before we read inside, let's just explain outside a few important points that the Rebbe is going to discuss here in Seif Dalet. The Rebbe is going to basically show that this Zoyar of Nitvas iu B'Rus de Liba is a little bit difficult to understand. And in order to properly understand this Maimer HaZoyar, we can give two explanations. We can learn the Maimer HaZoyar in two different ways. Whichever way you're going to learn, you're going to have to learn part of the Maimer HaZoyar a little bit different than you would simply understand. You could say, whichever way you're going to learn, whichever pirush you're going to say in the Zoyar, you're going to end up understanding a part of the Zoyar not so literally. What do I mean to say? What are the two explanations that the Rebbe is going to tell us in this Maimer HaZoyar? Let's start with the first one. The first explanation is how we've been learning until now. Nitvas iu B'Rus de Liba. That the Eibishter himself can be grasped through Ru'us de Liba. So let's take the first part of the Zoyar literally. The first part, I mean the Ru'us de Liba aspect. That the Zoyar is discussing Ru'us de Liba. We're talking about the accomplishment of Ru'us de Liba itself. What does Ru'us de Liba accomplish? So what does it accomplish? The Zohar says, Nitvas iu, Ru'us de Liba, this Ava, this great Ava that a Yid has to the Eibishter, can grasp, can connect the Yid to Atzmos Mamish. The issue is that although we just explained at length, the Ma'ila of Ru'us de Liba. Ru'us de Liba means a Yid loves the Eibishter because he feels like he is the Eibishter's child, and therefore he has an unconditional Ava to the Eibishter. He doesn't need to be mizbainin. He doesn't need to use tam v'das in order to bring himself to an Ava, but rather he has a natural and inherent Ava because he feels the Eibishter is his father. So that's the Maila that we just explained about Ru'us de Liba. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, Atzmos Mamish, the very essence of the Eibishter, cannot even be called a father. Cannot be called an Av. Like it says in Keheles, Gam Ben Ainli. When talking about the Eibishter, when we're talking at least about the very essence of the Eibishter, we can't even describe the Eibishter as a father that has a child. Because at the end of the day, a father, is a description and a title. And the very essence of the Eibishter, Atzmos Mamish, has no titles. He's absolutely undefined. So how can we call the Eibishter a father? And he has a relationship to us like a father has to his children. Now, of course, there are many psukim that describe Yidin as Banum Amakim. So of course there is a concept, and there is a concept, a diagonal likus, there is a true way of perceiving the Eibishter as a father. But again, the very essence of the Eibishter, Atzmos Mamish, cannot be called a father. And therefore, the result of that is that when a Yid has Ava Ru'us de Liba, which is a very strong and a very great Ava, but he loves the Eibishter because he feels that he's the Eibishter's child and the Eibishter is his father, the Ava is not directed to Atzmos Mamish. The Yid is not having a connection with literally the very essence of the Eibishter. He's having a connection with a very high diagonal likus. He's having a connection with the Eibishter with something that would be what we call more of an essential diagonal likus. But he's not connecting with the very essence of the Eibishter the way he exists within his most pure form. Just to help understand this idea a little bit, let's take a mashal b'nefesh ha'adam. You have a person. We know a person has seichel and midas. Seichel and midas are very limited and defined ways of how the nefesh expresses itself. Then there's a koyach of ratzon. Ratzon is a koyach that's beyond seichel and midas. Ein lecha davra im b'fnei ratzon. Ratzon is this power, the willpower that a person has that sometimes can veto and go beyond seichel and midas, etc. It's like the bleak vul b'nefesh ha'adam. But on the other hand, Ratzon is not the very essence of the person either. The very etzem of a person is even beyond Ratzon. So on the one hand, when a person is functioning, when a person is living with his Koyach HaRatzon, so you say the person is expressing himself. his very essence. When a person's living with his seichel and midis, so he's revealing himself, he's expressing himself in a very limited and defined manner. When he expresses himself through Ratzin, he's being himself. But on the other hand, is Ratzin the very essence of the person? No. Ratzin is just called the person himself in contrast to seichel and midis. So too, when we say that a yid has re'us deliba, and he's teifes ihu, he grasps Hashem himself, we don't mean Hashem himself the way he is in his very essence. We mean Hashem himself in contrast to Seder Shtalshlus, to the more limited and lower dargis in Likus. We know there's many dargis in Likus. There's a whole Seder Shtalshlus. Seder Shtalshlus is the way the Eibusher reveals himself, the way the Eibusher was mitzamtzim himself, and decided to reveal himself in very limited and defined ways. And Re'us Deliba grasps the Eibusher the way he's beyond Seder Shtalshlus. Hashem himself. But again, we don't mean Hashem himself, literally the very essence of the Eibusher. We mean Hashem himself in contrast to Seder Shtalshlus, or in contrast to limited and lower dargis in Likus. But at the end of the day, even though Re'us Deliba is this great ava that every Yid has, because the Yid feels that he's the Eibusher's child and Eibusher's his father, at the end of the day, if a Yid is just going to be living with Re'us Deliba, he's not going to really have a connection with the very essence of the Eibusher, the way he's even beyond being a father. And again, Atzmos himself is not defined by being a father. And if a Yid is just going to live with Re'us Deliba, his whole life he's going to feel like a connection that a child has to his father. So although he's going to have this natural love, and it's an unconditional love to the Eibusher, it's everlasting Ava, that's not connected with his boyness, etc. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be, this Yid who's living his whole life just with Re'us Deliba is not going to have a connection with Atzmos Yisbarach Mamish, with the very essence of the Eibusher, the way he exists beyond the title of being a father. This is the first way of learning the Zohar. So in this way of learning the Zohar, we're explaining that the Zohar is talking about Re'us Deliba. The Zohar wants to describe the greatness of Re'us Deliba. What does Re'us Deliba itself accomplish? And the answer is Nitvas Iyu. Through Re'us Deliba, through the Avodah of Re'us Deliba, you grasp him himself. What are you not taking literally? The word Iyu. Iyu in this way of learning the Zohar doesn't mean Atzmos Mamish. Doesn't mean the very essence of the Eibusher that is beyond even the relationship of a father and a son. So, again, in this Pirush, we're talking about Re'us Deliba, what Re'us Deliba itself accomplishes. And the answer is that it grasps. Re'us Deliba can be teifes Iyu, but Iyu is not so literal. Iyu doesn't mean the very essence of the Eibusher. Iyu means him himself in contrast to lower dargis in Likus, in contrast to Seder Shtalshlus, in contrast to maybe very limited and defined dargis. But it doesn't mean Atzmos Mamish. That's the first way of learning the Zohar. What's the second way of learning the Zohar? The second way of learning the Zohar is that Iyu means Atzmos Mamish. When the Zohar says that a Yid could grasp Iyu, it means that a Yid can have a connection to the very essence of the Eibusher, Atzmos Yisbarach, Atzmos Mamish. Not only in contrast to lower dargis Likus, but the Eibusher, the way he exists within his very essence. However, how could a Yid grasp the Eibusher, the way he exists within his very essence? It's not through Re'us Deliba. Rather, how do you grasp the Eibusher, Atzmos Mamish? Through fulfilling Torah mitzvahs. And this is what Abba is going to go on to explain at length here in Seif Dalid, why dafka, the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, is what enables a Yid to have a connection with Atzmos Mamish. Hold on. The Zohar doesn't talk about Torah mitzvahs. The Zohar talks about Re'us Deliba. So what's going on? How are you going to learn Pshat in Zohar? If you're going to learn Pshat in Zohar, that Iyu means Atzmos Mamish, and Atzmos Mamish, the very essence of the Eibusher, can only be grasped. We can only have a connection to the very essence of the Eibusher through the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. So why does the Zohar talk about Re'us Deliba? So this is what the Rebbe is going to go on to explain at length here in Seif Dalid, that although it's true that a Yid can only grasp Atzmos through the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, but there's a few steps, there's a few necessary details in order to properly have a tris, in order to properly grasp Atzmos through the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. What are the steps? So in general, there's 3 steps. We'll start from the last step. The last step is obviously the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. The last step is that we can only connect to Atzmos through fulfilling the Ratzon of the Eibusher. However, in order to properly grasp Atzmos through the fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, a necessary condition to being teifes Atzmos through Kiyum Torah mitzvahs is to do the mitzvahs mitech bittul. That the person should fulfill mitzvahs not because he has his own interests and his own incentives for why he wants to fulfill the mitzvahs, but he's fulfilling the mitzvahs like an Eved fulfills the Ratzon of his master. that a Yid fulfills the mitzvahs mitich kabbalah so mitich bittul. He does the mitzvahs just because of the Ratzon of Hashem. And in order, we'll explain, again, we'll elaborate upon this later on in the next Shiur and the end of Seif Daled, that in order to properly, of course a mitzvah connects you to Atzmos, but in order to have a real tefis, in order to say that you properly have a connection with Atzmos through mitzvahs, it's very important, it's integral to fulfill the mitzvahs mitich bittul, like an eved. So that's a condition, a necessary condition, in order to grasp Atzmos through Torah mitzvahs. And how do you come to fulfilling the mitzvahs through bittul? How does Yid make sure? How does Yid come to this? How does Yid have the ability to fulfill the mitzvahs with a proper bittul? That is specifically before the avodah of bittul, he has an av of re'us deliba. A Yid that has re'us deliba, again, this will be explained at length in the next Shiur, that a Yid that has re'us deliba, that's what allows him, re'us deliba will lead him to being able to fulfill Torah mitzvahs mitech bittul. What do we get from all this? That how are you teifas atzmos mamish is through Torah mitzvahs. But what enables a person to be able to be teifas atzmos through Torah mitzvahs is specifically fulfills Torah mitzvahs with bittul, and how do you come to bittul is specifically through having an av of re'us deliba. So the Zohar says nitvas iu b're'us deliba, and we mean iu mamish. You can grasp, you can connect yourself to the essence of the very essence of the Eibishter, iu mamish, through re'us deliba. What does it mean through re'us deliba? We don't mean re'us deliba itself. So we're taking the word re'us deliba not so literal over here. We don't mean through re'us deliba itself you grasp atzmos mamish. Rather, we mean that through re'us deliba, being hakdama, if re'us deliba is a introduction, is something that comes before your Torah mitzvahs, so then eventually through Torah mitzvahs, you'll be able to be teifas atzmos mamish. So that's the second way of learning pshat in the Zohar. What does it mean nitvas il b're'us deliba? It means that if re'us deliba will be your hakdama to Torah mitzvahs, then you will grasp the Eibishter himself through the kiyum of Torah mitzvahs. This is b'chlalos what the Rebbe is going to go on to explain here in Seif Daled. The point that I want to get to is, again, to explain what was going on in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer, that the Frierdiker Rebbe brings the Zohar that says nitvas iu b're'us deliba, that re'us deliba can be teifas atzmos. But then the Frierdiker Rebbe goes on to say that how you teifas atzmos through tshuva ma'asim tevim. How do the two things go together? That's what Rebbe wants to come on to bring up, that there's a second way of learning the Zohar. The second way of learning the Zohar is that how you teifas atzmos mamish is through Torah mitzvahs, like the Frierdiker Rebbe says. Tachlis chacham tshuva ma'asim tevim, that how you teifas atzmos mamish through tshuva ma'asim tevim. So what does the Zohar mean? That nitvas iu b're'us deliba, it means that the only way to properly be teifas atzmos through Torah mitzvahs is if you have the akdama of re'us deliba. Let's see the beginning of Seif Daled inside. Yuvan behektim the mashakos about maimer behem shichla inyan de nitvas iu b're'us deliba shaydei tshuva ma'asim tevim teifsim ba'atzmos. Says the Rebbe, in order to understand the question of Seif Gimel, let's preface that the Frierdiker Rebbe brings in his Maimer, he brings the Zohar, that nitvas iu b're'us deliba, and then he goes on to say that how are you teifas atzmos, how do you grasp atzmos through tshuva ma'asim tevim? So the Rebbe is really asking a question. What's going on in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer here? You start with A and you end with B. You start with re'us deliba and you end with tshuva ma'asim tevim. So says the Rebbe, Yeshleimar, what's the explanation of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer? Yeshleimar al piyam avur bekama mekaymis sheki o matero mitzvahs shel acher re'us deliba hu b'madrega na'as yisik it'll come on. Says the Rebbe, we can explain what's going on in the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer based on what's explained in many places in Chassidus, that when a Yid fulfills Torah mitzvahs after re'us deliba, it's a whole different Torah mitzvahs. As we'll explain in the Hemshech, as we'll explain in later on in Seif Daled. So that's what's before in Chassidus. In many places in Chassidus, it's explained that when a Yid fulfills Torah mitzvahs, after the akdama of re'us deliba, it's a whole different fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs. So says the Rebbe, al pizeh, based on this concept, yeshleimar, the mashakos, the bezer, shnitvas iu b're'us deliba, shnein yanim bezeh. So says the Rebbe, based off this, we could say two explanations in the Zohar. The first explanation is, shnitvas b're'us deliba atzma. The first explanation is, like we just explained at length, learn the Zohar simply. The Zohar is saying, the Zohar is talking about re'us deliba. We're not talking about Torah mitzvahs in the Zohar. We're talking about the accomplishment of re'us deliba. But then, as we said, and we'll see soon clearly that Rebbe's going to say this in the Maimer, if the Zohar is talking about re'us deliba itself, re'us deliba atzma, so then iu is not literal. Then we're not talking about the very essence of the Eibishter. That's one way of learning the Zayar. That we're talking about Rus Liba, but we're not talking about Atmos Mamish. Says Rebbe, what's the second pshat in the Zayar? The second pshat is V'zeh Rus Liba Hi Akdama L'Kiyam Torah Mitzvos Shebehem Mitzvos Atmos Mamish. The second way of learning the Zayar is that we're not talking about the accomplishment of Rus Liba itself. We're talking about, the Zayar is talking about Rus Liba, how Rus Liba is a Akdama for the fulfillment of Torah Mitzvos. And when Rus Liba is Akdama for Torah Mitzvos, so Torah Mitzvos themselves are Teifis in Atmos Mamish. V'hainu, says Rebbe wants to explain this second pshat in the Zayar. V'hainu, what does this mean? Shebichdei litis ba'atzmos mamish hu be'ikar lidei kiyum Torah mitzvos. Ela shezeh shalei ha'mais in the mitzvos teifsim atzmos hu k'shasir be'bittul. Says Rebbe, basically what's going on in the Zayar is teaching us like this. How are you teifis atzmos mamish through mitzvos? Mitzvos is what connects you to atzmos, the very essence of the Eibishter. However, there's a condition in order to connect to atzmos mamish through mitzvahs is specifically when you do the mitzvahs with bittul. When you fulfill the mitzvahs, not thinking about your own mitzvahs, but thinking about doing the mitzvahs because they're the ratzon of the Eibishter. And how do you do the mitzvahs with bittul? V'habittul shebasiyas ha-mitzvahs. U'ksha ava meviyah l'kim ha-mitzvahs hi'ava atz mishlamam tamadas rus l'liba. Says the Rebbe, and how do you come to fulfilling the mitzvahs with bittul? Specifically, when a person has an ava atz of rus l'liba, an ava t'lamayim b'tam v'das. Now the Rebbe, in the rest of Sif Dalid, in the rest of this paragraph, Sif Dalid, is going to go on to explain why specifically and why only the Ava of Rus Liba brings a Yid to fulfilling mitzvah Tech Bittul. The Rebbe here in the rest of Sif Dalid, in the rest of this paragraph, Sif Dalid, is going to go on to discuss a few other dargis in Ava and explain why all these dargis of Ava, even very high dargis in Ava, do not bring a Yid to fulfilling mitzvah Tech Bittul. And specifically, Rus Liba, specifically this Ava Atzmus, this natural and inherent Ava that a Yid has to the Eibishter, specifically this Ava brings a Yid to the fulfillment of Torah Mitzvahs Mitech Bittul. That's what I was going to discuss in the rest of this paragraph. Then, in the next paragraph of Dalid, the Rebbe is going to go on to explain why is it that you can only be Tefas Atzmus through mitzvahs, on the one hand. That's on the one hand. On the one hand, the Rebbe is going to go on to explain how you can only be Tefas Atzmus through the fulfillment of mitzvahs. You can't be Tefas Atzmus through Rus Liba. And you can't be Tefas Atzmus through, the Rebbe is going to go on to even say you can't even be Tefas Atzmus through Kabbalah Soil. The only way to be Tefas Atzmus is through mitzvahs. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, so why is it important to have Bittul? Why is it important to have Rus Liba? So that Rebbe is also going to explain in the second paragraph of Dalit. Both of these ideas, that on the one hand, you can only be Tefas Atzos Mamish, you can only connect to the very essence of the Eibishter through the fulfillment of mitzvahs. But on the other hand, it's still very important to fulfill the mitzvahs with Bittul, and to fulfill the mitzvahs as a result of Rus Liba, because only through the combination of both, only through fulfillment of mitzvahs, mitech bittul, and a result of Rus Liba, that's how you have the perfect combination to be Tefas Atzos Mamish in the most perfect way. That's what the Rebbe is going to explain in the Hamshech of this paragraph and the rest of Sif Dalid, which the rest of Sif Dalid we're going to leave for the following Shiur.